Hi, I'm Lois Powell. And I'm Susan Schuler, and we're here to share tips, tricks, ideas, and resources to help you discover what's your story.
Hey, Lois Powell, welcome back to podcasting.
Well, thank you, Susan. It has been a long time since we've sat down and had a chat, hasn't
It
it?
sure has. That doesn't mean we haven't been doing our research, we just haven't been talking about it.
Oh, we've been doing a lot of research, and some of us are doing even more now.
That's true. We're back in business with our programs and our podcast.
That's right.
You ready to talk about today's topic?
I am.
Okay, for our reunion tour here, we've picked a pretty challenging topic. Have you ever been to the National Archives?
I have not. I haven't had that pleasure, but for anybody who doesn't know, the National Archives, also known as the National Archives and Record Administration, so you've probably heard of it called NARA,
Mm-hmm.
is located primarily
in Washington, D.C., and the National Archives are the federal government's record depository. So they keep the documents and the records generated by the federal government's business.
So, have you been to the
I
National
have
Archives?
been. When I went, I didn't really go for serious research. I was more of a tourist. And the beautiful part about the National Archives is the bottom floor is kind of a museum, and that's where they have on display the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and they are really a beautiful sight to behold if you ever get the opportunity to go there.
I'm going to have to put that on my list.
I think you are, for sure.
So, not to be confused with the Library of Congress, though.
Right. The Library of Congress is distinctively different. You want to tell us how they're different?
Well, the Library of Congress is really responsible for documenting American history. They consider themselves the copyright repository. So it's very different than, as you say, the NARA, which is the government's record depository. So two different things, two different branches of the government, wholly different, even though they're both in Washington, D.C.
Right. Kind of work in consort.
And NARA has more than one branch, right?
NARA has lots of branches across the country, and that's where they say it's complicated to research at NARA, and we're going to try and break that down and simplify it for you. But one thing I would say is before you plan a trip, make sure you know where the records you want are located, because some records are in Washington, some are in Atlanta, Boston, St. Louis, San Antonio.
I think there's something like 21 locations, and they also have all the presidential libraries.
That's right, the presidential libraries too. So NARA holds about about 12 billion records, and that's just not paper records. It's motion pictures, it's maps, it's charts, it's photographs. So if your ancestor had any business dealings with the government or had any reason, like if they were in a lawsuit or they were convicted of a federal crime or even just tried for a federal crime, there would be paperwork to go with that, and that would be in the repository of National Archives.
And not everything's online. In fact, most things are not online.
Yes.
They made a lot of progress during the pandemic.
They sure did.
But before you go visit, you still want to check online, because that's what will help you determine where do you go.
Yes. And in fact, on the main website of NARA, the top right-hand side, there's a big button that says Visit Us. And it tells you all of the details about how to plan your visit, the best way to get an appointment, because some of these repositories are not fully open from the pandemic yet, or there's such a backlog of historians and researchers trying to get in that it's by appointment only. And then there's rules to remember. Like if you get some certain records, you're not going to be able to sit at a table with a pen and a piece of paper. They're going to, regulate how you look at those documents.
So when you're going to start to research NARA, let's talk a little bit about what is at NARA, what you'll find.
And what you won't.
And what you won't find. So it might help a lot of these who are looking for ethnic backgrounds, Native Americans, frequently difficult topic, African Americans, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, Hispanic Americans. These are groups that formally interacted with the U.S. government, and that's a really key piece. That's what gets documented, those who are formally interacting. Also, formal transactions with the government, which census records, arrival records, naturalization records, land records, military records. In fact, land records is an interesting one, because I never knew that When land was given by the government, they only recorded the first time they gave it.
Right.
After that, it wouldn't be considered a National Archive because it's not an interaction with the U.S. federal government. So that's kind of how you see the
Like
distinction.
when you sell your house.
Right. So no longer is the federal government, so it wouldn't be in there. So maybe that will help people understand a little better. The types of things you won't find there, this isn't a genealogy website. You're not going to find family trees, but you're also not going to find state, county, municipal, or church records. You're not going to find necessarily online copies of military service records. You're not going to find, absolutely not going to find any information to help locate living individuals. And again, you're not going to find that many online copies of federal records. A lot of what you're going to find is how to find the information.
Right.
So what are we going to focus on today?
So the National Archive, or NARA, as I'm probably going to refer to it for the rest of the talk we have, it's overwhelming. Like I said, it's 12 billion records. So sometimes we say it's like trying to drink from a fire hydrant. We're going to just talk about a couple of drips today because there's so much stuff. My dream is that someday we go on a field trip. But researching at NARA or using the NARA catalog can be really, really tricky. It's overwhelming, the amount of information that they have there, and it can take a while to master the best ways to find stuff. One of the things that NARA is famous for are what they call their finding aids. Now, a finding aid is a descriptive guide or an outline of archival collection. So, it's built to assist researchers in understanding the context of the collection and the content of the collection. This descriptive guide will also provide information that will explain the collection's significance, like how it will help you. Like, for example, Lois had Native American records. Well, there's probably going to be many finding aids about Native American records. And the first thing I would do is I would go onto their website and I would look for the finding aid about Native American records. And then it's going to tell you all of the things they have and where they have it and how they started collecting it and where they keep it and all the significance involved in that.
And how do you get to a finding aid?
You get to a finding aid by using the NARA catalog. So if you're visiting the NARA website, and that's something we should point out, that some of this stuff you can do from home in your bunny slippers, and some of it you're going to have to go there, or you're going to have to pay a researcher to go there for you.
So when you go to NARA, there are multiple big tabs.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really going to talk about pretty much two tabs.
Two tabs are probably the best.
Researcher records and finding veterans records. Those are really the two tabs we're going to talk about.
Right.
But when you're in Research Our Records, there are a lot of tabs, including the finding aids.
Mm-hmm.
So you can locate them there. There are several ways to get in. Also at the bottom of the page, you're going to find things like information for genealogists. They all paths lead to the same endpoint.
They sure do. My favorite button on that, when you're in the Research Our Records area of their website, there's a button sort of in the middle of the page that says New to Archival Research, and that's where I would begin. It offers a step-by-step process to refining your thoughts and your ideas and how to get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, on how to narrow your search and find what you're looking for.
Again, I think the most important question you should ask yourself whenever you're going to engage with NARA is, how does my research topic intersect with the U.S. federal government?
That's the question.
That's the main question. And if you can say, well, my grandfather had a leather shop and he made things. I wonder if that interacted with the federal government. And to be quite honest, that's an example that's real for me because it was my grandfather. And I found him and I found pictures of him at his company. I did not know. I thought he made harness equipment and things like that, but I did not know in the war he ended up making safety belt straps and helmet straps for the U.S. government, and that's why he's in there. That's how he interacted with the government. So that's an example of searching.
So Lois, you bring up an excellent point about your ancestor. Is that your grandfather, your great-grandfather? The leather shop had a contract with the government because of the war. So if there was no war and they didn't have the government contract, we might not find them in the National Archive.
Correct.
We might be in a state archive or a state library or a more local location for records of this shop.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about using the...
Can I add one more thing?
Of course you can.
But when I was researching, I did not know he had a contract with the government for the leather hats. So part of the fun of NARA, as well as the frustration, by the way,
Yes.
can be you say, I'm going to try this anyway.
Mhm.
I don't know. And in my case, it just happened to work. But at the time, I knew he had an industry. I knew it was leather works. I didn't know there was a government contract. Pure accident.
Serendipity of genealogy.
There you go.
I like to say. So the NARA catalog, it's got lots of great info on how the records are cataloged, and they have a button called Search Tips. And that is a great way to learn the technical terms for like keyword searching and wildcard searching, and how to be more specific in your search. And then how the NARA records are cataloged is very different than any library or archive I've used. So every topic you can think of has a record group or a NARA number. And they're pretty lengthy. And so then after all of those numbers, there's a record group and then a series. So it's a little complicated to find what you're looking for. So for example, I did a search on the Central Hudson Railroad because I'm interested in finding any photos or maps of the Central Hudson Railroad, which goes through New Jersey and then parts of New York. Or it did. It's no longer in business. So I did a search for Central Hudson Railroad, and it came back to me with 15,522 records, which is a lot, more than I have time to look at. And so my NARA number is a very long one. I'm not going to read it. And it tells me this first record is a map, which it says not yet available online. So as we said before, NARA did put a lot of records online during the pandemic, but when you have 12 billion records to update, I'm thinking it's going to take some time. And then part 2 of this is it tells me I'm in record group 21, and that is this item, this particular record, is held at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. And it gives me the address, it gives me their phone number, it gives me their fax number, and it gives me an email. So let's say I was a historic researcher who wanted this for my dissertation or for a project I was working on for work. If I was a lawyer or a historian, I could reach out to the archivist at College Park and get that information. Either I'd have to obviously pay for it to be shipped to me, or copies made for me, or make arrangements to come there and make my own copies.
And the key to all of that is when you do that, patience.
Patience is a virtue.
Because it is the government. They do have backlogs of records. So although you send in and you're ready to hear back, it might take a while until you hear back. So
Right.
Just be aware of that. It's worth it, but it might be a while. Well, that's pretty neat.
I think so. I mean, I was hoping to find photographs, but a map would help me as well. I have several ancestors that worked for the Central Hudson Railroad, and at least one that was killed by the train. And so I would love to see if I could find more information about the accident that killed him. And I know there was a lawsuit, so I'm hoping to see if I can find some information
you might
about
find
that.
more about that as you go along.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we should really talk about what, as a genealogist, you can find at the National Archive website. You ready?
Sure.
All right. So what here is going to help you with your research. There's a button smack in the middle of their website, smack in the middle of the page called Research Our Records, saying Research Your Ancestry. And so at that button, they have really great link, Start Your Research Here. That's where I would start.
It is an excellent video on PowerPoint. We'll give you a lot of information, but it doesn't necessarily tell you the how-to. So you still want to go out to the finding aids to get the specifics of how to search. The video PowerPoint that they talk about is a terrific overview, but that's what it is. It's an overview.
And I think if you go on their website and start to look at all this stuff, what we're saying will make a little more sense. We're a little handicapped with
voice only
being a podcast and not a video, because we could show you exactly what we're doing. And there's a lot of links here that would be helpful. So I think the most important one is that start your research here. Watch the video, look at the PowerPoint, and it will help you get started.
I agree with you. That's an excellent way to start. But if you're impatient like me, the first thing you're going to do is go to the search button and type in your family name. Now, be aware, NARA doesn't have searchable indexes that way. Okay, the documents are filed by the organization that created them and when they created them. So you might get lucky, low probability, but I always say, hey, what the heck, try it, right?
Yeah.
Then once you find out you weren't lucky, go back and watch the video.
It's going to be the record group and then the group number, and it's a complicated process, but it's not like being at our library or even the Library of Congress. Putting in your family name is probably not going to get you very far.
And while you're under that, I believe that's also where the databases are.
Right. There are several databases here that I think would be helpful or unusual, not databases that you find everywhere you go.
So it's worth looking at the databases and their links. You can go into the database if you happen to know specifically what is it. The Dawes roll, I think, is in there. Or there's fugitive slave cases if you're looking for African Americans. If you have some very specific information, some of those websites you can link right to.
So you said the Dawes rolls, maybe the Freedmen's Bureau.
The Freedmen's Bureau.
I wonder about internment camps. There might be information there.
Yeah, I haven't looked at every single link, but you should go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
And the second tab, should we talk about the second tab now?
I think so.
Okay, so that's going to be your first big tab, research our records. The second big tab that we look at as genealogists is the Veteran Service Records, and you'll see it right there. It's on the home page. And it really talks about all the military records on various wars. And it includes the compiled service record, pension applications, bounty land, and it tells you how to go about getting that information as well.
What you need to know.
What you need to know. And you do need, again, to be very specific because this is not searchable indexes. So, for example, in my father's case, he was in World War II, and I was looking for his separation papers, which you can do online. And I thought I had done a great job of filling out the form. Until about several weeks later, I got a letter telling me that I hadn't filled out the form correctly and they couldn't accommodate my request because I needed to prove that the person was dead. Well, my father has been dead for many years. But so I went back and I refilled it out, and they did send me the information, and it is free for the separation records, but you need things like dates of service, branch of service, the conflict they fought in, what kind of army they were, their service number, their social security number. So you need to go out there and see what you need and get your information all collected before you even make the request.
And read the fine print, because I'm willing to bet you that the limit is if the person has been dead for 70 years or more.
72, I think it is.
Yes, 72, which is the average lifespan.
Yep.
Or it used to be anyway. But did you have to provide their death certificate?
I had in this case, because it was so many years ago, they were willing to take an obituary. But some cases you'd have to provide a death certificate. Read the fine print.
Yeah, for sure.
But they did send me that package. They do, again, put the disclaimer up that they are backlogged. I did get a few pages. I didn't get everything yet. So I would, say that's a good place to go for veterans, especially in the World War II time frame.
So that's great that you were able to get your father's separation papers, and hopefully soon you'll get the rest of the information. But you brought up something very important, that they are very, very backlogged from the pandemic. And if you put in a request to get records, you will wait and be patient. You will get them, but it's going to be a while. I think the wait now is like a year. I think that's common. One thing I do want to mention about getting more recent records, like World War I, World War II, and all the way up to Vietnam, is the repository where most of these records were held in Missouri in 1973 had a terrible fire. They lost somewhere between 16 and 18 million records for soldiers. Some of them are you can get a record that might be burned on the side or fragmented, but there is a risk there if you're looking for somebody that was in World War I, World War II, or Korea or Vietnam, that it might not be a successful search because of that fire, which is tragic, I think, for history in general. So that's more recent records. What if you're searching somebody, an older ancestor, like the bounty land records from being in the Revolutionary War? A lot of our soldiers were paid with land. That's how they filled up the rest of the states, not colonies, but that was a reward.
Pension plan.
Yes. So for those, you will need to know what state they fought in. You will need to know the approximate years of their service. And then if you know their infantry and their regiment, things like that. It's a pretty complicated form. Be prepared, maybe look at the form, get your research, and then go back and fill it out. But like we said, look at the fine print.
And that has a fee associated with it.
That sure does, yes. The fee for, I believe, I don't want to tell you fees because I don't want to be wrong, but they start at about $80. There's you can get just their a CSR, which is their compiled service record, which might be just like when they mustered in, when they mustered out, when they were discharged. But especially like the Civil War, if you want the complete pension file, things like that, that can go up to 80. And I did get my two second great grandfathers. I got both of their pension files, and it was quite an education. A lot of back and forth. The first time, one of my great grandfathers was rejected from getting a pension. He applied for the pension. He was rejected. There's paperwork there, and they didn't have Xerox machines, so lots of times they would have to get a witness. I've known Jacob Rose my whole life, and I was at his wedding, so I know that this was his wife, and I know that he used to be a fit and healthy man until the war when his eye got shot, and incredible details of these stories. And now, of course, because Lois knows I love the fan club, now all these people who gave witness testimony, I'm trying to figure out how they know each other.
So you can get a lot of information.
You sure can.
Very cool.
Yes.
So the military, that military tab is a great tab.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also going to talk real briefly about, you can get passenger arrival records and immigration records.
Right. And the databases for Castle Garden and Ellis Island are right there on that ancestry page, that researcher ancestors
under that tab.
page.
Yep. And passenger arrival records are arranged by the port of entry and date of arrival. Again, something you should know before you start your search.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas immigration records tend to be more at the regional archives. Doesn't mean you can't get them. Do your research, know what you know, and then as Susan talked about when she was searching the catalog, it'll tell you which archives to search and how to contact them.
One other great database we should mention is the Soldiers and Sailors database done by the Park Service.
Yep.
And that's a great way to start if you think you have a soldier or a sailor from the Civil War. That's a great place to start and maybe ascertain some information, some clues there. One other thing I really want to mention from their researcher ancestry page is they have a beautiful guide on how to preserve photos, how to preserve your documents, how to save some of your family ephemera. Really well thought out and great suggestions, I thought.
And then there's one final topic we really haven't covered, and that's the History Hub.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
The History Hub is...
It's like crowdsourcing.
It's interactive if you have an account, but you can use
Which
it.
is free to make.
Which is free to make. You can use it to go out there and ask questions, or even just even without an account, go out and read some of the questions that other people have asked. There was one just recently, and it happens to be somebody not the same person I worked with here, but it was the same question, who was trying to figure out how do they prove that their ancestor had never been naturalized. So, I mean, that's a tough question, but there was somebody there who could answer those questions. So the History Hub is another great resource where you can just go fishing around and look for other people's questions and topics.
Be relevant to you. And people answering those questions, you have to have an account, which is free to set up. So it could be a librarian, it could be historians, it could be NARA employees or archivists, it could be people working on their PhD in a certain topic. You never know who's going to be out there answering the questions. And it's a great way to, number one, network with people who have maybe the same interests that you do, and to get an opinion of an expert in the field that you're interested in.
Yeah, so I didn't want to leave today without making sure we covered that topic.
No, not at all. The other thing I have to mention is NARA are the people we should be grateful for every 10 years, because they're the people who are indexing and cataloging the U.S. Census. So they just finished 1950. And then I guess in 2032, we're going to get 1960. Very exciting. So we're grateful to NARA for that. And then NARA also has a great YouTube channel. And They have wonderful videos on a myriad of topics, historical, cultural, anything related to history. Go out there and poke around, because I bet you there's a YouTube video that would interest you.
Got to do that. I haven't done that
And
yet.
then every spring they have a genealogy fair. And the actual archivist of the United States and many of the colleagues there talk about genealogy topics. And it's really interesting.
So NARA is difficult to use. It's confusing. It's frustrating. You have to be patient, but it is an excellent, excellent resource. And we highly encourage you to go out there, use some of the finding aids, familiarize yourself with the website, and go explore.
Get started. Yeah, that's the only way you're going to get in there. Think of the ways your family may have interacted with the federal government, and think of ways that you could start practicing.
No.
Right?
Works for me.
And if you're ever in Washington, D.C., I think NARA has the best gift shop.
Well, now I'll have to add that to the list, too.
Go. And the Library of Congress, but NARA has the best. Thanks, Lois.
My pleasure, everybody. Enjoy the NARA website.
We'll see you in a couple weeks with a less complicated topic.